Welcome to another X Space hosted by Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. I'm Lisa Simeone. DIAG is a 501c3 organization. We are on a mission to shed light on the harms of gender ideology, the medical scandal known as gender affirming care, and the erosion of women's rights. If you'd like to learn more about us, check out our website at di-ag.org. Today, we're going to look at a source that is feeding the social contagion of trans. It's where kids learn about so-called gender identities and are encouraged to pick the one that suits them best. It's where they're quickly affirmed if they decide their, quote, gender identity doesn't match their, quote, sex assigned at birth. This source of social contagion is not TikTok or Tumblr or Reddit. It is school, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, public and private. And the indoctrination isn't an aberration on the part of a few nutty teachers. It is embedded in the curriculum. We have asked two guests to share their insights into what the kids are learning. Anita Bartholomew is a magazine journalist, longtime contributor and contributing editor to the Reader's Digest, and most recently, author of the book Sacrificial Lambs. A liberal reporter exposes how the left harms children in the name of gender ideology. We're also joined by Arienne Adamcikova. She's a high school language teacher in the Bay Area and a union delegate to the California Teachers Association. Welcome to you both. And let's just make sure we have you both on mic and available to talk. So we're going to start with Anita, but I just want to make sure Anita and Ariane are both here. Can I hear a
Yes.
hello?
Hi.
Bravo.
How you doing, Lisa?
Bravo. Wonderful. Okay, let's start with Anita. I think everyone listening is aware that sex education these days isn't just about avoiding pregnancy and information about STDs. So, Anita, tell us what's in the curriculum and also how old are the kids when they first have sex ed?
Well, this will be a longer answer than you want, but it's called Comprehensive Sexuality Education, or CSE, and in some schools it can begin in pre-K. They call the lessons for these tiny kids anti-violence or anti-bullying, but that's to disguise the content. It really is applied queer theory. And queer theory wants to totally change how we think of sex. It frowns on the normative and it celebrates the transgressive. So little kids are taught that doctors only guess their sex at birth, but they don't say sex, they say gender, as you know. By third grade, they're expected to be able to discuss the difference between so called sex assigned at birth and gender identity. And by fourth or fifth grade, they're told puberty blockers could be helpful to deal with puberty. They're also taught that people might have penises or vulvas, but you can't call these people boys and girls because you can't know by looking at someone how they identify. But this is important. It's not just the sex ed curriculum. Biology books now tell children that sex isn't binary. In English language arts, they're assigned queer storybooks. And even worse than the curriculum can be the GSA clubs, which recruit kids as young as 5 and promote coming out as trans.
And
Those
what is
clubs,
GSA? What is
it's
GSA?
they used to be gay straight alliances, but now they're gender sexuality alliances, and they can be either called GSA or rainbow clubs. Sometimes they're called Skittles clubs, but they're indoctrination clubs. And because they're run by volunteers, they are the most committed activists.
You know, when as people are listening, I'm guessing that they're thinking, okay, this is stuff that's going on in quote unquote, far left places like Portland, Oregon, or Berkeley, California. I mean, that's what I would think if I didn't know about this. So, what about a parent in Kansas or Nebraska or Oklahoma or Michigan or wherever? Is the same stuff going on in those schools?
It really depends on the school district, but this is not only nationwide, it's worldwide. And Just to give you an example, some months ago, the Trump administration sent a letter out to 40 states and 4 territories telling them to remove gender ideology from their pregnancy and STD prevention classes, because this is a program funded by the government, the federal government. So the curriculum materials included gender nonsense throughout, instructing teachers to make sure you must announce your pronouns and ask students their pronouns, and pushing the idea that gender identity trumps sex. And yes, Oklahoma was one of those states. I believe Nebraska and Kansas probably too. But this is so pervasive that you can't just assume it's red state, blue state, purple state. It's very often just one activist teacher, and that's enough, or one kid who claims a trans identity, and that's enough to change the culture.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Okay, so if it's just one teacher or one kid, how does that change the entire curriculum? I mean, somebody has to be writing this curriculum, right? Someone has to decide we're going to teach kids XYZ. Who's writing the
Yeah,
curriculum?
that's why I'm saying it's not just the curriculum. But if you want to know who's writing the curriculum, well, there are probably dozens of sexuality education providers and publishers. But the biggies are Planned Parenthood, which is in the top two of sex ed publishers, and also coincidentally in the top two prescribing cross-sex hormones. Then there's Advocates for Youth, Answer, which is out of Rutgers University, and SIECUS. They teach kids, for instance, that lesbians and gays are not same sex attracted, they're same gender attracted. So if a kid shows any signs of liking styles or activities of the opposite sex, he or she is likely to be told, oh, so you're trans. And that's why your little 11-year-old girl who has some tomboy in her but has a secret crush on a little boy in her class might come home one day and declare, "Oh, I'm a gay boy, mom." This is just so pervasive. I really don't know how to explain unless you've experienced it. This is why so many parents are blindsided by this, because they might say, well, I'm opting out of the sex ed curriculum, but you can't opt out of English language arts. You can't opt out of social studies, math. You can't opt out of having the staff, the teachers, the administrators all pushing this gender identity nonsense.
Let's bring Arienne into the conversation. Arienne Adamcikova, you're on the front lines. You're a teacher. You're actually in the public schools teaching kids. So I'm wondering if all the teachers are on board with this stuff. I mean, I can't believe that there must be some, for instance, biology teachers who object to this. Are any of them refusing to teach this stuff?
Yes. I'm a high school teacher in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've been a teacher for a long time. And I would say that the sex ed curriculum is one thing. And then we do have um, curriculum in all of these different classes that we are, really as teachers, we are supposed to be bringing in diversity into what we teach, into our curriculum. And high school teachers, we may have a textbook, but we go outside the textbook because we're creating our own lessons like any good teacher does. You create things to excite the students, to engage the students, etc. And yes, are there biology teachers and science teachers in general that are teaching that gender is not binary and there's a spectrum and they're completely misrepresenting differences of sexual disorders and misunderstanding them and misrepresenting them to their students? Absolutely. Are there a lot of teachers that don't do that? Yeah, there are. I would say that the biology teachers where I work do teach regular, real, biology. They're not doing this stuff. I have talked to them specifically about this, and they do reject it. And I think it's hard for them to understand that some of their colleagues, even with our own district, are doing such things. And I wish that I could get them to speak up more, but we do see this everywhere. You know, in ethnic studies, in the health classes, And a lot of people, I'll just say one more thing about that. A lot of people don't really understand what it is that they're teaching. Now, I expect the biology teachers should understand, but a lot of the health teachers and ethnic studies teachers don't really know enough about gay history to understand what it is that they're being asked when they're being asked to be inclusive of trans and gender identities. And so I think that that's a really far cry from teaching your kids that there was a gay rights movement to all of a sudden there's 13 different gender identities in the gender curriculum. It's like, that's nonsense. You have to question that, and you have to be skeptical of that as a teacher.
But this must cause, I'm guessing it has to cause some friction. You've got teachers who are teaching that there are 13 or 50 or whatever the hell different genders, so called. And you've got teachers who know the science and know that this is garbage and this is unscientific nonsense. There's got to be some, is there no friction between the teachers here?
I really have my ear close to the ground to see if there are points of contention and friction, and there aren't any. I think teachers are going along doing.
Okay, we've lost someone. Can anybody still hear me? Um,
Yeah,
I've
I can
lost.
hear you. Ariane
Okay, I've
just
lost
dropped out.
Arienne. Let's try to get Arienne back. All right, so Anita, you can still hear me. It means we're still on
Yes.
X, but I've lost Arienne. Are
Okay,
you
I
still?
think I'm back now.
Okay, Arienne, please continue. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I was saying when you lost me. However, what I was going to say is that there are a lot of teachers that we often close the door and we are teaching without any connection or collaboration. It's something that I fight and work for a lot because I went through the Stanford Teaching Education Program, so-called STEP, 25 years ago, and we learned to work in collaboration with each other, working with other teachers in what we call professional learning teams. A lot of districts, I would say even more so since COVID, we are not working together as much. So I think that there are a lot of teachers teaching what they believe to be true without anybody else really monitoring them. So it's very difficult, I think, for anybody to know, which is why we get a lot of requests now in our district, and I think everywhere in California, for parents that want to see what it is that we're actually teaching. So, I could be teaching all sorts of nonsense, nobody would know, but I try to be very respectful and of all of the different cultures and people that I have in my classroom, and respectful of what is real and what is scientific and evidence based. And but I teach, I'm teaching language and I'm teaching culture, and I have to be very respectful of other people's points of view. In fact, that's something that I got out of being somebody who lived in other countries. That I always have to be respectful and mindful that there are different ways of viewing things. And I would say gender, this sort of new way of understanding gender, is incredibly new. There is no culture on earth. There is not a single native culture anywhere that teaches children that they're born in the wrong bodies in a way that they must change their body to be, okay and mentally healthy. That's just not something that's done. I do have a great deal of respect for the Mushe, the Papafine, and the various Two-Spirit cultures throughout the world, but they are not teaching it in this way at all, and it's a real misunderstanding.
I'm glad you brought that up. We don't have time to go into that. We'll probably devote a future DIAG X space to just exactly that misunderstanding, because I read about that a lot, and people who are in the quote trans club are always bringing that up. Anyway, we'll save that for another time. Before I go back to Anita, Arienne, I just want to ask, how many kids in your classes do quote unquote identify as trans? Do you have a lot of them, or a few of them, or what?
This year, I have one student. And I do not believe that this student is out to their parents, and I'm completely ignoring it. In fact, the day that the student said something to me about it, I just said, "Oh, you just need to be comfortable with yourself. This will pass." I said something very light, but in that particular class, when I am teaching, gender in, the Spanish language, I really go into feminism, into gender nonconforming, and I explain how gender of objects has nothing to do with actual, like, the biological sex, and try to kind of unpack that for all of my students. And particularly in that class, I try to put a few other points on there to kind of get this student thinking about what it is that they're saying that they actually are.
Okay, one student, and
Yeah, just
according
one.
to according to Mia Hughes, who's a therapist in Canada, she says that this whole thing has run its course, meaning it's the trend of trans supposedly has run its course, and kids are now making fun of it and ridiculing it. So, well, just I'll throw that out there. We can talk about more. We'll talk more about that later. I want to get back to Anita for a second. Anita, Ariane mentioned her education at Stanford, teacher education 25 years ago. But
Mhm.
but the teacher training these days, what is the curriculum, Anita, these days? You've looked into the curriculum, the education curriculum to teach teachers how to be teachers. What's it like these days?
Well, it is actually the entire university in some places is immersive gender ideology. But of course, the teachers are taught that this is social justice and this is what you must be teaching, not just in terms of gender, but everything in is based on the idea of activism in the classroom. And it's not just the teachers, it's the social workers who are being taught this. I mean, you will not get your graduate degree if you don't go along with it. Also, the administrators, they're going to the same schools. So it's kind of that tortoises all the way down, it's gender all the way down. And the teachers' unions are very much on board with this. And it's not just in school. When they're out of school, teachers have told me. And I've seen the teacher training and the teacher guides. They are taught to teach in a certain way. They are taught to ask for pronouns. They are taught to give their pronouns. They are taught actually if a child. I just got a teacher training module a couple of months ago from one woman who works in the Pacific Northwest, where they were taught how to respond to children who say, wait a minute, there are only two sexes. And they are actually taught to bully these kids out of believing that and telling them how hurtful it is to say that to their fellow students. So yeah, it's an immersive situation, not just in the university, but in the public school system where they just it. And I also have been told that the older teachers who don't want to go along with this, they're trying to push them out. So I understand why Ariane says that a number of people in her school don't want to talk about it because they've probably gotten the hint, shut up and go along or get out.
You mentioned, Anita, you mentioned the teachers union and unions, and I have to ask Ariane. Ariane, you're in the teachers union, so you've got your ear to whatever's going on there. How do the how does the teachers union respond to this? Are they all on board with it?
So I have to say that the teachers union is actually more on board with it than your rank and file teachers. The union's leadership is generally, I would say, more hardcore social justice, more sort of progressive, which I am as well. I'm very progressive in my politics. And so I would say that people that generally move up the ranks in union leadership, we tend to be very much, pro healthcare, pro, rights, gay rights, women's rights, the disability rights. And so we fight for those things at the union level. Absolutely in California, my particular union, CTA, is incredibly, what do you call it? With just absolutely going along with this and pushing it. Part of the thing about the curriculum that got pushed in this sort of so-called inclusive LGBTQ plus curriculum that has to be somehow embedded in all of our classes that we teach as a form of representation, um, that came partially through the union pushes to make sure that there was representation. What I think that most teachers and most regular people don't understand, and I do think that they're confused by it and they don't want to offend anybody, and this is the real issue, because we don't want to offend our students. We're always trying to engage all of the kids in the classroom, and we're trying to get the kids to accept all, the differences, the different ways of speaking, there's kids with different abilities, and we're trying to get them to work together and appreciate each other. And so this was kind of tacked on to the coattails of LGB, and now you've got genders, like I said, 13 different genders, and non-binary, and trans, and I really think that a lot of the teachers have no idea that this is different from accepting gender nonconformity. Because for 20, 30, 40 years, I think that most kids well versed in child development understood that a preschooler who was playing with so-called gender nonconforming toys, or toys that normally or regularly the opposite sex might play with, if that kid was playing with them, that's a perfectly acceptable part of human development, that kids will play with any toy and that we should not be judging them or taking them away. I certainly sent my son to like a cooperative preschool where, all the toys were there for all of the kids. It wasn't like segregated by sex. But I think that teachers today think that if you see a young male child playing with dolls and with the girls, or a young female child playing with trucks and more congregating with the boys in preschool or kindergarten or first grade, that teacher now feels that they have a duty to protect that child and try to figure out whether the parents are on board with a trans identity, and they will want to ask that child and the parents to be able to use opposite sex pronouns, rather than being inclusive of all different personality types and toy types and interest types. We are now reducing everybody, to all of our 4 and 5 and 6-year-old children, to sex-based regressive stereotypes. And literally, we're telling the kids that they must be the opposite sex if they like to play with the opposite sex toys, which is the most ridiculous thing. And I meet elementary school teachers now when I go to CTA union leadership things, because I'm a high school teacher. I'm not normally in contact with these teachers. But when I meet them, they will tell me stories. And they're like, well, we just don't know. They're all trying to be nice. They're all trying to do the same thing. And I would say that this is part of the heteronormativity of society, that people aren't skeptical enough. I think because of my background in activism in LGBT rights, I know a lot more. I knew people that transitioned in the 90s. I knew so much about this early on. It was interesting to me. So I unpack this for teachers all the time in the union. Now, I will also add that I have spoken to many of the union leaders in the LGBTQ plus caucus. I go to those meetings. I have talked to many of them individually. I have spoken to the president of CTA, David Goldberg, one-on-one. He agrees that there's some childlike age inappropriateness to a lot of this curriculum. And I keep pressing, and I will continue to keep pressing. A lot of them don't want to hear it, but I keep pushing the needle, and I keep explaining that gender nonconformity is associated with being gay later on in life. And the worst thing that you can do to a young child or even a teenager is tell them that their feelings are wrong and their experiences of being in the wrong body, that's an appropriate response to feeling awkward. Adolescents and children feel different. We have to help them accept this, and we have to help teachers understand the connection between gender nonconforming kids and later developing same-sex attraction, and that's okay. But right now, we're sending them on a medical path unwittingly. These teachers do not understand that this is a medical pathway, and a very, very negative one.
But,
in my view.
okay, so a lot of them will turn out to be gay, but not all of them. I mean, when I was growing up, girls who liked to play with quote unquote boy things, I mean, I had brothers, I didn't have sisters, so we were tomboys. That's what we were called. We were tomboys. Nobody pretended that we were actually boys. I don't see how this has become, this is so crazy. I don't see how teachers find this difficult to understand. I mean, you must be looked at as a real heretic in the union
I
if
am
you
looked at as a real heretic. But I think that the people that are my friends who have known me for a long time and respect me because they've seen all of the other things that I've done in my long career as a teacher, there are more people willing to listen to me. Um, but it is very confusing. And I think that's because most teachers are not gay, they're not same sex attracted, or they're not bisexual, and they have no experience of this in their lives. And they may have like a few gay friends, but they don't really understand it very well. And but I get what you're saying because a lot of the kids that are jumping onto the trans bandwagon are not gay, and I there's just so many different things. Like there's so many reasons that a child might decide that they're trans as a middle schooler or an adolescent, but the real problem is that it was put into their head in the first place that there might be something wrong with them and wrong with their body. No child should be told that. And I don't understand like all of these teachers where we have learned about child development and adolescent development, how we could possibly think that sending that idea that there are problems with the body could be appropriate. We don't tell kids that they have the wrong skin color. We don't tell kids that they have the wrong body type or, shape of nose or style of hair. Those are huge no-nos. And we also understand that adolescents are expected to be flexible. They're playing around with identities. I don't mind that they're playing identities with each other, but it's when the adults in the room affirm those identities and don't understand that they're affirming very negative self views. They're encouraging kids to dissociate from their bodies. And that is a huge problem. We have to go back to basic adolescent development theories.
Ariane, if you don't mind telling us, before I get back to Anita, Ariane, if you don't mind talking about this, it's a personal thing, but you not only are a teacher, so you're right in the front lines, but you have a son who at one point went through some kind of awkward gender, quote unquote, gender confusion. So how much do you think he was influenced by just the soup that we're all living in now, whether that's the internet or the social trends or school lessons? How did you handle that? What was that like, and how much do you think he absorbed from just what we're from society?
So it's 100% a social contagion. If my son had been born in the late 60s like I was, he would have been like a punk rocker or a goth. He would have been some alternative identity, right? Because that's what all the cool weirdo kids did. That's what I was. That's what my partner was. We were all kind of weird. We were all like on the margins. He would have done exactly the same thing. I look at all of the kids with trans identities and non-binary identities today, and they are the creative types. Many of them are very smart, very nerdy. Some of them are really into science. Some of them are really into drama. Those are my people. And I just get really sad. And I started getting sad when I first started seeing this about 10 years ago. Um, with my son, it was really hard. He got it at school, definitely, and on social media. Now, he was 16 and we were just coming back to school after the pandemic in the spring of 2021 when he told me that thought he was trans. And my partner and I navigated it very carefully. There was not a whole lot out there for me to find, but I knew that it was not, I knew that my son was dealing with a mental health crisis and an identity crisis and much too much time online. During that year, we had never let him have that much access to social media and online as we had during COVID. And I think all of us got caught up in that. We all became, part of the social media soup, so to speak. I think he was on Reddit, he was on Discord Had he learned about this in school? I absolutely believe he did. When he was in middle school before COVID, he's now 21. So when he was in middle school 10 years ago now, he joined the GSA club. I didn't pay much attention to it because I just thought it was fine. He was probably exploring himself. I was happy that there was a GSA club. What I realized is he was probably in the GSA club because he was, he was a lonely kid. He was definitely different from his peers. All of his male friends were probably, growing faster. Some of them had girlfriends. He wasn't doing anything, and he was feeling pretty awkward. And so he was trying to find himself. I am sure that they were teaching gender identity in his middle school in San Francisco. I'm 100% sure. I just never thought about it. I never asked. I should have gone in and just inquired about what they were learning in that club at lunch. I really should have, and I didn't. Even when he was 16 and going through this, and 17, there was not much literature out there, but I was finding it. And I did find that I think it was Erica Anderson, or can't remember. Anyway, there's a trans-identified psychiatrist, as well as another person that wrote an article. I think it was in the Washington Post. I'm not sure. But I did start to see some articles where people were pushing back a little bit, like not all of these kids are trans. We really need to focus on mental health. And so from there, I found a lot more. And that's what helped my partner and I go through this and carefully kind of get our son to more of a radical acceptance of just being odd, and just get through puberty and don't make rash decisions. Like, let's work on you. And it was a long process. However, I continue to work on this with a lot of other parents that are in the middle of it. I don't think it's going away. I think that we're kind of at the same level as we were a few years ago. But it was terrible. It was probably the worst 18 months of my life. I felt I just could not understand how my son was so dissociated from his body. I read a lot about the internet, about how kids, just these addictions in general. I just was like, this is avatar life. These kids are inventing avatars for themselves, and it's a comfort for them. They're sidestepping puberty, they're sidestepping rejection, they're sidestepping maturity, and they're just in the comfort of their little phones and their little communities on their phones.
And did the school agree with you? Was there pushback? I mean, were the teachers like saying that he has to have different pronouns or anything like that?
Oh my goodness, we made a lot of mistakes when it happened. We affirmed it sort of at the beginning, and the school, by that point, he was at a private high school, a very progressive, very expensive private high school in San Francisco. And they've been dealing with this for many years because, as probably a lot of people listening, you know that this hits people with higher income, in the higher income bracket. It's sort of a problem of the elite, I would say. I don't know, but I teach at a much poorer school, which is why I think I see fewer kids in this. So, but definitely wealthier children are dealing with this. So the school definitely had a protocol already in place. They were working with us side by side, making sure that all of the decisions were with us. But that is not what happens in the public schools. The public schools are hiding secrets from parents. I have spoken out about it publicly, even in Sacramento, in front of the education committee of the California Assembly. I have spoken out about it at my own school board this past fall, but I have been asked to hide these social transition plans and new names and new pronouns from the parents, even when the parents were great parents, and I could not understand. I complained. I said I wouldn't do it. So, I've seen this from both sides, and I tell people, and maybe because I was a parent of a trans identifying child, they will listen to me. It's probably harder if you don't have that experience, but I use that experience as much as I can to say, no, do you think I'm a bad, problematic parent because I knew my kid was going through a mental health crisis And I might have said, you can't do this without me. So, it's interesting. The private school, he transitioned after he graduated. I mean, not, he didn't ever transition.
Detransition. He
He
detransitioned. Yeah.
desisted. He
Okay.
didn't ever take hormones, but he desisted from his out of that identity about 6 months after high school, after he graduated.
Okay, so
And
you
it was a
brought up this is a good point. Ariane, you brought up the question of hiding from parents what's going on
yeah,
with their kids. And this is what I want to ask Anita about because there's been a lot of publicity about actual state laws that encourage or even mandate teachers to hide a student's newly declared so-called gender identity from the parents. For instance, in California, I think that there's a statute 191955 that bars school systems from requiring teachers to inform parents. So, Anita, you've done a lot of research on this, and you have some egregious examples of schools doing this, sidelining parents in your book. So, what? Give us an idea. Share with us, please, one that you think is really emblematic where this is going
Y-
on.
Yeah, the law you're mentioning actually doesn't require parents to be um, left out, but that's the way the government is interpreting it. So we've got a Supreme Court case coming up, Mirabali versus Bonta, because the Attorney General is of California is saying, yeah, you must keep the parents in the dark. But anyway, yes, I've covered quite a number of these cases. And since we mentioned GSA clubs before, we can talk little about Erin Lee's little girl. Erin Lee had just moved to Colorado, the area in Colorado, with her family. Nice little town. Her daughter was, I think, 11, possibly 12, and didn't know anybody in the school district, and she was invited to join an art club. And the art club turned out to be a secret GSA club. And they just love bombed this kid when, after they convinced her that, well, if you do this and you do that and you do the other thing, oh, you must be a boy. You're not a girl. So she agreed to identify as a boy. And they were just like, oh, this is wonderful. But what's we talk about in this room stays in this room. Don't tell your parents. So fast forward a little while, and Erin Lee's little girl did tell her parents, and they brought a lawsuit against these people. There, you probably know about Erin Friday's child, who was also she just accidentally heard that during COVID, while her daughter was in the other room, on a Zoom lesson, that the teacher was talking to her child as if she were a boy and using a boy's name and pronouns. There was another little girl in Olympia who I wrote about in Sacrificial Lambs who really loved her teacher, and her teacher was very much an activist. And this was a 10-year-old girl who was from India, and so the teacher convinced her one day when she came home from a presentation she was doing in Indian costume and she had to dance in it. She said, gee, the dress was itchy. And the teacher said, ah, well, maybe it's not just that dress. Maybe you just don't like dresses at all. Maybe it's because you're not a girl at all. And the little girl eventually did let her mother know that this was going on, that the teacher had convinced her to call herself Felix. The parents took the little girl out of school, but it didn't end there. The teacher kept emailing the little girl and saying, hey, what's going on with you? Is there anybody around you who is safe? In other words, who will affirm your gender identity? And by this time, the little girl was backing off and didn't want to be called a boy anymore. But the teacher kept pursuing her, and at one point said, I'd take you into my own home if that's what you needed. the parents were so frightened by this that they actually sent the children to live with their grandparents in India. And the parents wondered, well, could they possibly take my child away? Because as most of you know, probably, there have been many cases where if a parent won't affirm the gender identity of a child, the protective services come in and call the parents abusive and take the child away. So in this case, the little girl told her mom, "Well, I don't want to be a boy anymore, but I'm afraid my teacher won't like me." There are just thousands of these cases, and sometimes there's an actual law on the books, as in California and now in Washington State and Oregon as well, where um, they will they will really try very hard to cut the parents out. Uh, these queer theory indoctrinated teachers see parents at best as an impediment to what they consider the best interest of the children, because again, they are indoctrinated. And at worst, they see parents as the enemy. They do very much actively work to alienate the children from their parents, and I have seen this over and over and over again, whether they're adhering to just a school policy, or there's an actual law in place, or there's a regulation. It's really um, an amazingly destructive culture where even if not all of the teachers are on board, as Ariane mentioned, the unions are very much on board, and I've mentioned it before. The national union is very much on board. You you you're living in this soup of gender ideology where this is the good thing, and anybody who doesn't agree with it is the bad person.
So you mentioned Anita that it seems that these laws encourage teachers to suspect parents or to be at odds with parents, to look at parents as enemies. And Ariane, do you see this on the front lines? I mean, I know that you have a duty to report. If you think a child has been abused, for example, I understand that teachers have a duty to report that this is happening. But what about this business about the kid thinks he or she is trans? Do you have a duty to report that, Ariane?
So I think that this is a really complicated question because I know that there are some very serious cases where there was a really activist teacher, or there was a teacher that was like just flat out grooming a child into separating from their parents, into believing this about them, into believing that this teacher was going to save them. I don't think it's the norm, but I do think that teachers, by and large, and counselors, and all the people that work in schools, we are a caring profession. We are in this profession because we want to help kids, not just academically, but we know that in order to succeed academically, we have to be accepted and feel like we're liked. So teachers have a we do extend ourselves in different ways. Now, we are at the same time that there are, I would say, these activist teachers, who are suspicious of the parents. I don't think that by and large, we all think that. We all know that we have to reach out for the parents. We know that we get support from the parents when there's a behavioral issue, when there's an academic issue. I call a few parents every week. I email parents every week. I give updates. So this is a tool that we use. Like, we are working in concert with the parents, and we're trained to do that. We are evaluated in how well we are connecting to the families. So that's really is an important aspect of being a teacher, is our connection, and a positive connection with the parents. Now, do teachers see really big problems happening? And do we suspect neglect and different types of abuse? Yes. where this gets really difficult is that, again, there's these teachers that understand this trans identity to be so innate to the child that they do feel like they've got to like somehow protect the child from so-called bigoted transphobic parents. And that's really unfortunate, right? And it's been connected to LGB, where if you were to tell me, well, you don't out an LGB kid to their parent, I'd be like, well, I don't out any kid's romance. You know, I'm a high school teacher. I see kids dating each other. I see kids like sneaking kisses in the hallways. I don't out any of those kids. None of us do. Now, if a kid crosses a boundary, you know, then parents get called in. If a kid is sexually harassing another kid, parents get called in. So I think that it's just it's trans has been so conflated with being gay in our schools that teachers think that when they're protecting a trans identity at school, that it's like the same thing as like not outing the kid that you realize, okay, oh, that kid's gay. Because you don't, you know, you want to keep that kid protected or safe. You don't know if a kid is out to their families. You don't know if a kid is out to their peers or their friends. You might suspect. So I see this as like a really, like it's a more nuanced thing. But again, teachers are not understanding trans. And when a teacher is guarding this secret, well, a trans identity at school is a social transition. It's not secret to anybody, right? All the other kids are now expected to use that new pronoun and that new name. So that's not a secret anybody can keep, right? So if the whole school knows, then the parents obviously need to know. The family needs to know. If a kid is gay, as a teacher, I don't know who knows. If it, you know, I don't have kids coming and secretly telling me. I think I had one like years ago. It was a newcomer student from another country. I spoke the language. They kind of let me know in a very metaphorical way. And I just said, you know, we're a very positive school here. And here's some resources. Here's some other people you can talk to. So it was, but again, I'm not going to.
Oops, I think we've lost. I think, all right, we're going to wait for Arienne to come back because at least I cannot hear her anymore. But she brought up resources. This is a good segue to talk about libraries and librarians, Anita, because school library books, I know that I've seen some of them, and I cannot believe some of these things that are being given to young kids. I mean, to say that they're wildly inappropriate is an understatement. They're so sexually explicit. I mean, for young kids who barely even know which end is up, these incredibly sexually explicit books and also picture books, let's say about drag queens, which, you know, what the hell are you giving a little kid a book about a drag queen or a girl who likes math and science? So, oh, she likes math and science. Well, she must really be a boy. Talk about regressive. So you've looked into these books, Anita, and I think people don't have any idea. I really think most people have no idea the kind of books that are in these libraries and are being pushed on kids. So how common are these books about, quote, gender ID in school libraries?
Oh, they're about the most common thing you can find, according to some of the parents I've spoken to. And there's a charity. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Possibly open something or other that is they promote these books and they actually give them free to school libraries that don't have necessarily the funds to get them. So they want to make sure that all the kids are reading about queer kids, about having a different identity, what have you. But when you get into the middle school and the high school books, as you say, that's where you're really getting into very graphic books. So you'll see books like Genderqueer, for instance, where it's been quoted from quite a bit, where one of the quotes, I don't have it handy with me, but it's something, I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth, and, you know, I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. There's
Wait a
another
minute,
book
wait
that
a minute, wait a minute. This is for what? For middle school or what?
it's in the library. Yes, it's in the library. there's another book, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. I'm blanking on it, but it tells kids. Um, it might be This Book is Gay. It might be another book. It might be Let's Talk About It. But anyway, they tell kids, well, kinks are just part of sex, and if you want to research kinks and fetishes and things like that, go on the internet. You'll find other people who are really helpful who will, talk to you about it. In other words, go find the pedophiles because they can't find you on their own, right? But this comes back to the comprehensive sexuality education, where, and it's again based on queer theory. And I'll just read you a quote from a Planned Parenthood executive director in one of the affiliates who said, "We are all sexual beings from birth until death." And he called for porn literacy in children. This You might have seen this clip from Lee Fink, who is a Minnesota rep, who was very upset that they were talking about age verification on porn sites for kids in Minnesota. He said, "Well, yeah, but porn could be educational for queer kids. It's their sex ed." So this is,
Wait, I'm
he's
sorry.
saying
Who is this? Is this a state rep, a
this
U.S.
is
rep,
this
or a
is
rep of
a no,
Planned
this is
Parenthood?
a state rep in Minnesota. So he's a lawmaker in Minnesota. He calls himself a woman. This is a fellow who 10 years ago or 15 years ago something, he was a new father. He was talking about how wonderful it would be to raise his son as a kind man. And then a few years later he became um he decided that he was trans, and he became a publisher of books where he told kids, if your parents don't accept your trans identity, reject them. And parents should take children to sex shops to get binders and penis packers. So this is everywhere. And yes, these books, again, as we were talking about, books like Genderqueer, books like Let's Talk About It, and Flamer. These libraries don't just sit them on the shelves. One parent took a photograph of this big poster that they had with all these very explicit books, and the post-it said something to the effect of, these books, they're trying to ban these books. How do you feel about book banning? And this is presented to the children. So naturally, these are the books that the kids are going to want to take out of the library, right? Oh boy, they want to ban these.
Well, I
The
think
funniest,
people need to understand that when liberals, and I consider myself a liberal. I think all of us in this
yeah,
conversation
me
do. But
too.
when we exactly, so when we hear book bans, our it raises our hackles. Oh my God, don't
Oh, of
ban books.
course.
But we're talking about stuff that's just simply wildly inappropriate. And it sounds
Wildly
to me,
inappropriate. Yes. Gay and straight sex, oral and penetrative sex in illustrations in these books for children. And you've had, in school board meetings, you may see that parents will try to read from these books to show how inappropriate they are for children, and they'll be shut down because you're not allowed to speak obscenely in a school board meeting, right? But you're allowed to give these obscene books to your children. So yeah, they're painted as if they're right wing and Bible thumpers, whatever negative connotations they can come up with. But they're parents. We're not talking about To Kill a Mockingbird here. you know, I mean, these parents would probably be thrilled if their teen or preteen said, "Oh, I want to read To Kill a Mockingbird." No, they're pushing sexual books on kids because in uh, this idea they have of social justice, uh, kids need to be liberated to explore their bodies, uh, to derive pleasure from sex. You've heard, I'm sure, of sex positivity. This is all these concepts are all from the same place, where when Gail Rubin wrote the original manifesto that launched queer theory on us, she talked about how children might be the ones who initiate sex with an adult, and therefore we cannot punish the pedophiles for it. So this conversation could go on and on and on, but this is the underlying crazy philosophy that children are sexual beings. They deserve a positive introduction to sex, and they deserve to know in very explicit detail what sex is about. And I think a lot of the girls who are going into this, coming out and saying, I'm a boy, a number of psychotherapists are saying, well, they're trying to escape being sex objects. They're being scared by this material that's being pushed on them, in my opinion. And now, just to end this, we have uh, a group, a nonprofit I discovered the other day in Washington, D.C. called 0 to 3. And they talk about how wonderful it is that they're going to educate children from, the moment they're there, from 0 years old to 3 years old. And one of the things, of course, they want to educate them about at that young age is gender ideology.
Wow. Okay. We do have to wrap this up before we take audience questions. I want to very quickly go, Arienne, you're speaking to us with your real name and your real profession. So clearly you're not afraid of losing your job, right? And you've already said that you've talked to some of your fellow teachers and they're pushing back. I'm wondering how much pushback is there really? Do you think that things are turning around or not?
I think that things are turning around a little bit. Right before COVID and right during COVID and after COVID, that like all of this PD was pushing pronouns, pushing gender, and I don't think very many teachers are really bothering with it very much anymore. I think the real die-hard believers are, but even when I go to union meetings and everything, nobody is introducing themselves with their pronouns. Again, there are a few, but they're sort of like the real true believers, but so much less of it. So I do think it's dying down a little bit. And I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. I do think, at least at the high school level, I think that the teachers and counselors can see much more clearly that there's a mental health component to the kids that identify as trans. And so we care about kids with mental health struggles. That's definitely in our wheelhouse. So I think more people are making that connection. And, thankfully, because we need to.
Okay, so before we go to questions, one more thing. Sorry, audience, one more thing. I'm going to ask each of you. Arienne, you first, and then Anita. What can parents do? What steps can parents take to basically change this, to turn this ship around? First, Arienne.
Okay, what I'm going to say is you have to go into the schools, even if you are more conservative, you need to say that you are concerned with LGBT youth and them getting confused with trans identities, because you just need to go in with them believing that you are on the left, that you are progressive, and that your concern for the gender is coming from your advocacy for same-sex attracted youth. And I know that doesn't seem like it seems like a weird place to come from, but I believe that you have to come from a social, like you have to be like social justice for LGBT, because it is the most clear way in which these two things are in opposition. You also, and so you have to, if you're worried about it, go in with that as your sort of, I don't know, your entry point. And that you want to see if they're doing a really good job with helping kids understand same-sex attraction versus other gender identities, or that bodies are wrong. So you need to I think you need to go, like, you have to go in educating, because unfortunately, most of these people are not very well educated about it. So that's sort of an entry point for me when I talk to people. Um,
It's
and
also it's also kind of damning. I mean, I have to say, you have to, even though I am a liberal, I think it's very damning that a conservative parent, whom I
I
respect
know,
just as much as a liberal
I
parent,
know,
that a conservative parent has to go in and pretend
I know.
to not be conservative. I mean, this is crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. And I agree 100%. I think that any parent should be able to go into the school and ask to see the curriculum without fear of being judged. And we just don't see that anymore. And in fact, I do know a number of parents in my own district where I work where they have had to become very silent. And they're not even conservative, they're just regular, sort of liberal or moderate or whatever. But they had trans identified kids and they just shut down. They no longer volunteered, they no longer did anything because they did not want their kids to be judged because the parent was not on board with the trans identity. So I just think I hate to say it, like I said, I hate to say it, but it is, our schools are run by mostly Democrats, and our schools, most of these people do not understand what it is that they're teaching. And I wish I could explain that. I feel like everybody here probably knows really, really well what the gender ideology is. But most of the people I work with do not understand. They now come to me with questions about it because they know my feelings, but they don't even quite understand why I feel the way I do. And so it's very long and multiple conversations. So I would just say be very careful and come about it that you are concerned for the LGB youth. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the way it
Anita,
is.
Yeah.
okay, Anita, do you have any
Yes.
do you have any guidance on how
I
parents
have
should approach
a
this?
slightly different view on this because, that might work in some cases, but I have talked to parents all around the country, and there really hasn't been anyone who's been able to say that they have been able to get through to the schools. Even one mom who was very progressive, radical feminist, thought she had inoculated her little girl against this ideology. Well, the little girl was lonely, and this is where she found love bombing and friendship, and she ran away at 12 years old. So, my feeling is you cannot combat this in the school. If you have the wherewithal, you have to get the kid out of public or even private school, because private schools are pushing this too. If you have the wherewithal, put the kid in Catholic school. They're not teaching this in Catholic school. They're going into some of the social justice nonsense, but not gender. And if you
Yeah, but not
can't,
everybody can afford to do that, right? A
right,
lot of
not,
people
that's what
can't
I'm
afford
saying.
to do
If
that.
you have the wherewithal. The other option, I would say, is there are homeschool cooperatives where you don't have to be there every day with your kid if you're working. Get together with a dozen other parents, each take a day. Um, get the hell out of Dodge if you're in a school system where this is really promoted, because even within one, it could be one school to another, there can be a different, but be very aware what's going on. I've done a lot of public records requests on curriculum, as you can imagine, and you cannot get all the materials that individuals teach because they will have the curriculum materials that are mandated for this grade, but then activist teachers will bring in other sex education contractors or speakers for a day. I'm sorry, you cannot actually combat this effectively from within the school. Um,
Well,
it's
it sounds like Arienne,
I wish I
it
could
sounds
say
like
something
Arienne's
different.
trying to do that. It sounds like
Yes,
Arienne is trying to do that. So, Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
trying to fight it from within the schools in the ways that I know how with these effective arguments. But it is true. It's really, really ingrained. I do think that it is a little bit less ingrained than it was a few years ago. So I am hopeful, but I do think that the educators need educating, and on that, that's what I'm working on. So I work with LGB Courage Coalition and trying to figure out what can we do around education. How can we retrain the educators? I have a lot of friends who are education professors in their own colleges and teaching universities. This is where this is a big problem right now, and so I educate a lot of them. They're very interested. I think some of them, there's some very divisive politics in a lot of the education pipelines right now over this issue. And I do hope that as things change culturally and legislatively, but culturally, I just feel like we need to get some articles published in the New York Times,
well,
and that will
actually,
start to change people's minds
Good
about
luck.
this.
Good
uh,
luck
I
to you.
know, I
may I
know.
may I jump in because this is actually exactly where I have been focusing, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts. We are not going to change the schools. I understand that Ariane might have some success with individual teachers and might not, but we are not going to do that. We have to change the problem of adults like you and me and Ariane and everyone else having been brainwashed into believing that trans is a real thing. And the only way we're going to do that is by inundating, and I don't mean writing a comment on an article, inundating our trans brainwashed media with corrections letters. Every time you see something in the New York Times, on CNN, in the Washington Post, on MSNBC, on CBS, every time you see something that pushes this ideology, that makes an incorrect correct statement, we all have to write letters. It can be short letters, just, I request a correction. This is inaccurate. Please update this article, or please update this news report. We're not going to fix this unless we fix the media that people consume. And I know that people have been trying to, I myself have tried to sell articles to alert readers about what's happening and why it's wrong. There is right now a blockade at most media outlets, although every once in a while you'll see a gender critical opinion piece or article come through. But my feeling is that this was an enormous campaign by autogynophiles and their allies to harass our media anytime anything appeared in news, in print, in broadcast that was in any way not in conformity with their ideology. This was a massive effort. This was GLAAD, this was HRC, this was ACLU, and every autogynophile who ever was on Reddit. They just inundated. We can do, and we have to do the same. We have to insist on reality. I don't guarantee it'll work. And if it does work, it's not going to be tomorrow. Because, these AGPs started their campaign probably 20 years before everything turned around and suddenly we had on the cover of, I guess it was Time, the trans tipping point. Or was it Newsweek? I forget. Whichever it was, it doesn't matter. They campaigned very successfully. And we have to do the same. We just have to insist that enough is enough and we want the truth told.
Okay, on that note, I'm going to see if we have any audience questions for Anita Bartholomew or Arienne Adamcikova. Um, we have a lot of people listening. I'm not surprised because I thought this would be a very popular X space conversation. Maybe people are dazzled, not dazzled, that's the wrong word, just appalled by some of the things we've heard. But do we have anybody who would like to ask a question of either of our guests?
I'm not
Um,
one lined up.
and that's Ellie. Ellie, you do have one lined up?
I don't see anybody lined up.
Oh,
Nope.
yeah, I don't see anybody either, which I mean, it's a lot to absorb, and I know people, a lot of our audience is very well attuned to this stuff, but I think there was definitely some new information here about the kind of things that are being taught in curricula. So if nobody, I'm going to
Um,
just give it a few more
there is
seconds. Go
a
ahead.
there is a question online post. Do teachers ever consider the malpractice risks following from interferences with family relationships?
Wow, malpractice. So, okay, who wants to take that? Let's start with Anita. Do you have any idea? Have there been anything that you've researched? Any
Uh,
possibility of malpractice?
I have not heard of anyone discussing malpractice. There, of course, have been several lawsuits about teachers socially transitioning, but the claims and the lawsuits never, from the ones I've read, and I've read dozens, never said anything about malpractice. What they talked about were 14th Amendment rights, First Amendment rights, rights of a parent to raise their child with their own values, which the Supreme Court has affirmed on a number of occasions. Uh, but yeah, malpractice is interesting. That would be one that, if we had a lawyer on board, would be a good one to ask about because I I hadn't even heard that. That was not on my radar.
Ariane, how about you? Any idea? Have you ever heard anybody talk about malpractice?
I have never heard that term used in education settings because it's a medical, thing generally. But there are a lot of complaints about teachers. I know that people have often wondered, well, aren't you afraid of getting fired because you're speaking out? And I say, well, that's the thing about a union is I have tenure and I have a right to free speech outside of work. And they would have to find reasons to fire me for, not non performing my job. And I think that's when we get into the lawsuits. So there are lawsuits about, as Anita was specifying, there's a lot of lawsuits right now across the country and in California where parents found out that the school was hiding information about their child and secret transitions. Now, I would love to see these lawsuits really, really hit the mainstream and for for people to learn more about them. I think that they're winnable because if you go back to just the California teaching standards and the trainings that we do over the summer, teachers have to go through these online trainings and we are not allowed to have secrets with students. It is very clearly spelled out. And so if we are keeping secrets on gender, and and the parent finds out, I absolutely think that that can be a lawsuit. Now, is it malpractice? I don't think that that's the terminology that would be used, but yes, I think that we can be sued. I think that for me that just seems like a fireable offense, but we do need to figure out the law right now, which I know is in the Mirabelli case, whether schools absolutely have to keep these as secrets or don't have to keep them as secrets. When people ask me, they're like, "Oh, can I tell the parent?" I'm like, "You should absolutely tell the parent that that's what that kid wants to be called. The parent has a right to know."
And yet,
Okay,
in the
go ahead,
Mirabelli
Anita. Go
case,
ahead.
yeah, in the
Go ahead.
Mirabelli case, the reason that Mirabelli case exists is because 2 teachers were suspended because they refused to keep secrets from parents. So
And what
there's the
state?
law.
Where was this? What
This
state
is
is this?
California. This is California. So, there's the law as written, and then there's the law as it's applied and enforced. This is, again, there's a petition to the Supreme Court right now because the judge ruled in favor of the teachers, and uh, the attorney general and the school district immediately appealed. It's not as simple as the law is on my side and I have tenure. If they want to come after you, you have to go to court. And this is several years. The case has since, it started off with just these 2 teachers saying, we want to be able to be honest. And it now has been expanded to, I believe it's called a class action now, because parents have also come on board in Mirabelli saying we have a right to know what's happening with our children.
Okay, let us go. I think we have 2 more. It looks like we have 2 more people who want to ask questions. Is that right,
Yeah,
Ellie?
we do. We have, I'm going to elevate Learned Mama and Tyrone T in that order, if you could go ahead.
Okay, Learned Mama, hit us.
Hi, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
So many things come to mind during this conversation because I actually do have a master's in education, but I've been, an at home parent since I had my kids and involved in the public schools for a long time. And it's interesting to me. One thing is the whole social emotional learning and teachers feeling like they have to socialize children versus allowing the family to be the social agent for the child and the school just being the learning venue. But also how this whole gender ideology and gender identity has usurped Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development with, identity formation, because identity formation is really about your ethics and morals and values and interests. It's not about, like to me, goth is not an identity. It's just like an aesthetic preference that people latch onto for a period of time and are, so called interests and preferences, if you want to label that identity, evolve over a lifetime, and to feel like kids need to pick a gender identity. I think, like the teacher was explaining, it is seed planting that causes body dissociation. And I think that we can and do need to get it out of the schools. And it will take time to eradicate because it's been a slow, steady creep for a couple of decades, especially in the state of California. So I don't know what your thoughts and feedbacks are about that, but I have other ideas too about how this is a belief system that, somehow you can be born into the wrong body is akin to religion, and schools should not be teaching religion to children. They should just be teaching academics. And this is where we've gone way wrong.
I'm glad you
Okay,
brought that up because
Anita.
I actually, in Mirabelli, Judge Benitez at one point, one of his rulings said that you are trying to replace the family's religion with another belief. And I've spoken to a couple of lawyers about this issue of teaching a belief system in school, because if you were teaching Scientology in school, which is also a belief system without a God, right? So you can say gender ideology doesn't have a God, so it's not a religion. That's one of the arguments I hear quite often when I speak about this. I say, well, no, Scientology doesn't have a God either, but they're very clearly a religion, and they fought to be called one with the IRS. The 2 or 3 lawyers I've spoken to about this with. One of them said, yes, we're looking for the right case. One of them said, no, absolutely, it will never fly. And one of them said, it's interesting, we should think about this. I would love to see that. That would be a way to get it out of schools immediately. There was a teacher in Florida, because in Florida you're not allowed to teach this nonsense, who lost her job because of calling a kid by chosen pronouns and names, first name. If we could just follow the law that tells us that we have a right not only to freely express ourselves religiously, but not be compelled to follow a belief system. And certainly the government cannot compel us to follow a belief system. Yeah, well, maybe we could get this out of schools fairly quickly. I'm not sure why there's such a difference of opinion from the lawyers I've spoken to. I guess from the one who was very interested and was looking at it and was trying to find the right case to bring, I'd have to draw her out more. But yeah, wouldn't that be
Okay,
great?
let's go to, I believe we have Tyrone. Is that correct? Tyrone wanted to ask a question. Let's see. Tyrone, are you still there? It looks like you're listening. Are you unmuted? Can you ask your question, please?
I
Tyrone T.
think Tyrone T left the speaker role. So let us know if you want to be elevated to ask a question. We did have an online question about, sorry, get that up. I was interested to hear one of you suggest that teachers might be realizing that trans ID youth tend to be socially isolated and awkward. How much evidence is there that teachers in blue areas might be picking up on this obvious fact in larger numbers?
Why don't we give that to Arienne? What do you think about
Um,
that question?
I wish I knew the answer. Um,
Whoops. Have we lost Arienne again? Something's going on. Sorry for the technical glitches. Arienne, are you still there? She said she wishes she knew the answer. It looks like she's Arienne? Hmm. Well, anyway, she did say she wishes she knew the answer. So if there is no one else, it looks like, do we have another request?
I do have an additional comment
Is that
that
who
could
is it?
be,
Okay,
this
is
is
that
Learned Mama.
okay? Go ahead.
Part of me wonders, because I think about this sometimes with some of the legislators who are trying to pass legislation to get schools to conform to teaching this stuff, like Scott Wiener types. If a lot of the social emotional learning and these identity formation aspects that are brought into schools are adults just trying to work out their own unresolved childhood issues on the backs of students. And I'm not sure how we can get, instructors to move away from that and to focus on academics and learning versus making assumptions about how kids should be socialized.
is it
That's
working?
Go
I can
ahead.
answer that. I'd love to speak to that a little bit. So, we know that kids learn, we're social, humans are social. Humans always learn through socializing. I do think that that's maybe a piece that I think gets misused a little bit. SEL is a very specific set of strategies. I think that they were kind of pushed out like, oh, teachers, you need to be using these. A lot of us pushed back saying, I'm not the kid's psychologist. I don't even know that these are good. Like, I don't think that these necessarily align with the cultural best practices. And I am going to respect that the families are dealing with these certain issues in a way that I cannot. That is not my role.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Arienne, did you say SEL? What is that?
SEL, social emotional learning,
Okay.
which Learning Mama brought up a couple of times. So social emotional learning, it's sort of a set of practices that really maybe you're going to work with a therapist on, but it is kind of just that, and I'm not very good and well versed in it, but it's this idea that you're checking in on yourself, you're being grateful, you are thanking people. These are common practices that happened before we had a term called SEL, or social emotional learning, like, express gratitude, what are you going to do to get through a really challenging performance that you have to do, or a memorized dialogue, or a big test. It's sort of like giving kids strategies, but they can bleed into like more of a therapeutic type of thing. And that's where I think that things get a little bit dangerous. Now, we talked a little bit about religion. I like to say, well, actually, if you believe in science, if you believe in biology, if you're an atheist, you have no God, you also have a right not to believe or be forced to hear about gender ideology. And I actually think that religious, freedom from religion is a really good aspect to fight this in the schools. But the problem is that the teachers and those, in our public schools do not see gender lessons as an ideology that have anything to do with religion. They really think that they're teaching scientific fact. They really, really, truly believe that. And so it goes back to the overall culture needs to shift. And even though some of the laws are now shifting, and now maybe the hospitals are under a lot more scrutiny, and the doctors, it's the cultural shift. And I remember Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad talking about this on Gender Wider Lens, saying, okay, now we've shifted some things, and post-cast report, some things are happening in the UK, but people are really believing it still. And it's the culture itself that has to change. And that's all that we can do. And that's us here at Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. That's LGBT Courage Coalition. That's my one-on-one conversations with people in leadership roles and teachers I work with, and talking to more parents, just talking to everybody, just bringing people in. It's like a slow cultural shift, and we are going to dispel it through the lawsuits that will be breaking through that media wall, through these court cases that are happening, and through, the Mirabelli case is a really important one. No, schools should not be hiding these secrets, and teachers have a right to tell parents, and teachers have a right not to believe in this stuff and to not teach this stuff. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but
okay, let me ask,
yeah.
Arienne, are the teachers actually given a curriculum, an SEL, social emotional learning curriculum, that you're supposed to teach?
No. Oh, no. No, not at all. It's sort of like, it's one of those things like imbued into what we do. But what I'm trying to say is these are common good practices that, kindergarteners, teachers were doing 50 years ago, where like, oh, you like threw that ball at that girl's face on the playground. We're going to reenact that whole thing. And how could you have handled that situation better? We are teaching kids to be social creatures and how to behave with one another from the time they enter our public schools. And, in my own classroom, I'm like, hey, you know what? You need to stop like kicking that kid in front of you. You need to do this. You need to do that. I'm always having to attend to the social behaviors in addition to the academic content. There's no way to not do one without the other.
Yeah, it seems like common sense, frankly. I mean, my God.
A lot of it is just common sense, but I think the SEL, when it became more of a thing, there are some curricular ideas that go along with it, and there are some things that I think are maybe a little bit dangerous and go too much into what the family needs to be doing and not what the educators need to be doing. I can't really
Okay,
give very many examples, but it is one of those things where it's kind of on the border.
Anita, did you want to jump in? It looks like you did. Am I correct?
Yeah, I just a couple of points that what is happening in some cases with so-called social emotional learning is that you're putting teachers in the position of being therapists and telling kids, how's your day, what do, and trying to draw out their quote unquote, as one social worker who works in the school systems in the Pacific Northwest told me, they're trying to constantly draw out the trauma that the children are having, and they presume that every child has trauma, and they're focusing so much on this, this connection, this emotional connection, and that it can actually become harmful because they do not know what they're doing. They are not therapists, they're teachers.
And I've pushed back on that, just saying exactly that. Like, we are not therapists, we are their teachers. This is not a new, like, teachers are already such multitaskers, and we are already enacting so many roles. And yes, do I feel like I'm the child's parent sometimes when I'm like, hey, you can't say that to that person, or hey, what's going on with your homework? Or maybe you need to put that cell phone away, and things like that. But it can cross boundaries. And it does seem, I think, to Anita's point, there are teachers that we know our kids have a lot of trauma. I mean, I've often been in the Spanish speaker world, teaching newcomers from, war torn, drug cartel torn neighborhoods in Central America. There is a lot of trauma, but I can't be the one to unpack that. That needs to be handled through a professional therapist and with the family through family systems. So it is a danger that I think that our public schools are expected to do so much, that then teachers kind of naturally gravitate towards those roles, because they care, because we see kids are struggling, we see that kids have really difficult home lives, but there's got to be some other areas in our society that can support these families and support these kids, and it can't just be through the school.
Okay, before we wrap this up, do we have any other audience questions?
Yeah, we have one online, and we have Kevin Waldman, so I'm going to bump Kevin up to speaker for you. Go ahead, Kevin. Kevin, you have your mic muted.
Hi. I appreciate this conversation. I wanted to say, well, the question I was gonna ask was about the emotional learning, but it kind of got covered. I'm working on something now where we're interviewing students that are trans identifying on college campuses, and what we're finding is that they're being taught. In my opinion, as someone who works with a lot of these students, it's masquerading as diversity, and we all know this in this conversation, but a lot of the result is that the trans students end up disliking the gay students. And this is being taught. And so my question is, do you think if we expose more of this, because I've just received word actually this week that I can replicate this study to kind of prove this, do you think that this is something that would work in order to bring some attention towards this? I'm most likely going to do it either way, but I'm wondering your opinions on kind of exposing the overtaking of the gay community, or using the gay community, I should say, and kind of turning itself on, by masquerading as this inclusivity, but really there's a lot of aggression, and I think it's worth exposing. I'm curious what you guys think.
And I just want to pop in and say Kevin Waldman is a researcher, and we've had him on the DIAG X Space in the past to talk about his research along with Forrest Brom. And you're saying, Kevin, that there's like this antipathy now between so-called trans people and gay people. The trans people dislike the gay people. Why? Because what? They think the trans people think that the gay people really should become trans? Is that what it is?
So this is the crazy thing, is that they're teaching, it's all about oppression. So it's like the oppression Olympics. And so the activists who work as therapists but are actually just educators, they are teaching the young trans identifying students that it's all about a kind of a hierarchy of oppression, and the gay people had their shot. Now it's your turn. And so what they're not, although it's masquerading as inclusivity, the result is apparently that the trans students almost resent the gay students for having for currently living more successful, quote unquote, passable lives. And I think that what we're doing now is we're realizing that a lot of these trans identifying students, who aren't trans by the way, but that they identify as it, they there's psychological issues that need to be acknowledged that are being brushed away and ignored by the institutions that are pushing this forward.
Oh,
Wow.
I wish that we
An
had Ben Apple
Anita, go
on
ahead.
this. Yeah, Ben Apple apparently has talked quite a bit about how, as a gay man, he was kind of pushed to the side because gay wasn't in and trans was. But as you probably know, Kevin, when Rubin wrote Thinking Sex, which really started the trans movement, the queer theory movement, although there have been people who identified as transsexuals forever, um, she created the image of okay, the gays have now finally gotten their civil rights. So what about all these other quote unquote sexual minorities, including transsexuals, as she called them at the time, and including pedophiles and zoophiles and what have you. So it really is an oppression Olympics and has been from day one. It's all about oppression of people who transgress sexual norms, right? And gay people really aren't doing that, are they? We are, gay people are just seen as ordinary, normal people. The interesting thing about queer theory now, which, is an offshoot of, is that there is no such thing as actual same sex attraction in queer theory. It's same gender attraction. So,
Right,
as
right.
I mentioned before, so that's what children in school are being taught. They're not being taught that to be gay is you're a man and you're attracted to another man, you're a woman, you're attracted to another woman. No, you identify as a man and you are attracted to someone else who identifies as a man. You might both be women, you might still be gay, or you might be a man and a woman. So, we've got to understand where this is all coming from. The crazy ideas that that anything that is transgressive is good and anything that is normative, including homosexuality normative, is bad. It makes sense that the actual just plain old vanilla gay guy, is not going to be very high up in the hierarchy. Because why is he only attracted to people with penises, right? He's a bigot. He should be attracted to anyone who identifies as a gay man.
Wow, Kevin, we'll probably have you on to talk about this research once you finish it and write about it, since we've had you on in the past. And the way, Anita, I have also had Ben Apple on a DIAG X space as well. So thank you. We'll probably have Kevin on again to talk about this. This is fascinating. Do we have any more audience questions before I
We
wrap up? Let
we
me just ask
did
Ellie.
we did, but somebody left. I did see another question talking about how Texas was able to pass the Parents' Bill of Rights, and voters approved it by 70%. Any chance California is going to do something like this? Yeah, that was kind of my. And the other question that I'll throw in, this is for Arienne. What do you think it would take to get the GSA LGBTQ clubs out of schools?
Ooh, I don't think they will go out. Not in California, not in a lot of places. I just think that they're too entrenched. And I think that, some of the reactive politics that we have right now is that, yeah, it's true that our GSAs that used to be a gay straight alliance became like gender zones is a huge problem, because now they're just, it's a huge problem. At the same time, I do have colleagues that are in charge of the GSAs at their schools, and they are actually trying to unpack for the kids some of these really wrong-headed notions, which I think is important. So it's about educating the teachers. I don't think that we're going to be able to get these clubs out. I don't know that I want to necessarily get them out, at least in the high school level. I do think that we still have a lot of kids that need to be okay with being gay. And, we do have all different kinds of clubs. I mean, I've worked at a school that had some sort of like studying Satanism. Like every single kind of club can be out there. It just has to be managed and advised very carefully and very well. And for that, I think we just need to have a lot more teacher and educator professionalism, which I do not believe we are currently doing in this country. I think we need the Finnish model, where you put a lot of your efforts into educating the educators and really getting the best and the brightest that are very critical thinkers, that are very conceptual thinkers. And I like to think of Finland a lot because, the chief academic or adolescent psychiatrist has written some really great things and spoken out on gender identity and gender ideology and recognizes it for what it is. And so I really have I've always had a great deal of appreciation for Finnish education. And even now I go, and they're the country that cares the most about their kids, that actually saw through the gender ideology quicker than the rest of the world. So again, for that question, there's no easy answer. We're not going to get those clubs out of our schools, at least in blue areas. And in the places where they do, it's going to just be more of a political war. And it will make people want those clubs even more because they're banned.
Okay, I think that's it. Is that it, Ellie? I'm going to wrap up unless we have another question. Otherwise,
That's all we got.
okay. Well, thank you. Arienne was the last one to speak. Arienne Adamcikova, high school language teacher in the Bay Area and a union delegate to the California Teachers Association. Thank you. Also, thank you to Anita Bartholomew. Her book is called Sacrificial Lambs: A Liberal Reporter Exposes How the Left Harms Children in the Name of Gender Ideology. Thank you both so much for this conversation. And just a reminder that I'm speaking for Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender, DIAG, and our website is di-ag.org. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm Lisa Simeone. Have a good evening.